Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
It's panic. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Book of Trump. I am your host, Gordon McCormick. Today is August 25th, 2025. And we are on chapter 28. This is part 2 of the Robert Maxwell story. And I'm being joined tonight by my old friend, Warhamster Brady. How are you?
I'm great, man. You got a really cool intro for the Book of Trump. I like that. I got goosebumps through part of it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's good to have you here. So like we did two of the characters that I determined were going to be multi-part episodes. Netanyahu was one, Maxwell was another. So with both of them, I kind of did a 3-hour show by myself, just kind of running through as much of their background as I could. And then Netanyahu, I think, actually ended up doing a second show by myself. And then I think the next time I do him, I'll probably bring somebody on. But I determined that the formula here that I've convinced myself is I do a show about the topic when it's somebody as big as Maxwell, and then I bring somebody else on who can talk, who we can have a dialogue and a conversation, because the dialogue and conversation, I think, is where you really get into like really good rabbit holes. But the problem with the dialogue and conversation is you don't cover as much ground, and there's so much to cover with Maxwell, as you know. I mean, he's a huge topic who spans most of the 20th century in terms of his his involvement in this stuff. And the most significant parts, the end of World War II, all the way up to the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, that's the 20th century in a nutshell, right? So,
yeah, I think it's a really good idea to have a dialogue, especially about a guy as complex as Maxwell, because as we talked about before the show, there's a lot of different versions of certain chapters of his life, and the big picture, we know some things for a fact, and others is more speculative, and the different sources are going to give you slightly different answers. So I think a dialogue is the best way to handle that. What do we know for a fact, and what's conjecture, and what's just bad yellow journalism? Because there's a lot of that out there with Maxwell. I mean, there's people out there that think he's the mastermind of the entire deep state. Well, that's probably not the case. But it's an important conversation, especially because it relates to current events with his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. Oh, and I got to say this right up front. I was guilty of this when I did my video with Colonel Tanner Watkins over a year ago on Robert Maxwell. And you were guilty of it when you did your first one on this channel of calling her Ghislaine. And I was reading your comments, and there's a guy from England who was watching who was really frustrated that we Americans aren't smart enough to know that it's pronounced Ghislaine.
It's Ghislaine? Okay.
I'm going to make sure well, that's what he said in your chat. So I'm going to make sure we get that right tonight.
I've heard that. I've actually heard her called that before. So, okay, Ghislaine. We will call her Ghislaine for now. We'll call her Ghislaine. All right. So let's, before we go any further, let's do an ad read. And tonight we have, for our first ad read, Goldco. Let me pull up the video. Have you heard about President Trump's impact on gold? Every time Trump's name surges in the headlines, gold goes with it. It happened the day he took office, and it's still going up. Gold doesn't just like Trump, it rallies around him. If you bought gold the day he became president, you'd be up almost $400 an ounce by now. Here's the thing. Gold has been used as a store of value for centuries. The government can't easily manipulate it, and it's known as a hedge against market risk and inflation. How high will the price of gold go under Trump's second term? Will gold continue to break record after record in 2025 and beyond? Learn about an IRS loophole that allows you to diversify your savings with gold and silver, tax and penalty free, with a free copy of the gold and silver kit sent directly to your doorstep. Plus, you could qualify for up to a 10% instant match and bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio. That's badlandsgold.com. All right. So, with that said, you and I were talking before, and it sounds like the way that you want to start the conversation, which I think makes sense to me, is we're going to play it's about like an 8-minute, like a 7 or 8 minute clip from the show that you and Colonel Tanner Watkins did a year ago about Robert Maxwell.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to do. I mean, it doesn't matter if we start with it. We can start with his childhood stuff and add there, but however you want to do it, you're the host. I wanted to play that because I think the one thing we do know about Robert Maxwell is he absolutely ruined the way peer-reviewed science is done in the entire world. That's his biggest claim to fame for me. The biggest damage he did to it was what he did there. And as opposed to going back and rehashing my own notes, I'm not going to be able to present it any better than I did last year. So let's just go ahead and roll what we did last year, and you fill it in with your commentary and comments and questions, and we'll go from there. But because to me, that is his crown jewel of why this guy goes down in the bad guy Hall of Fame more than anything else he ever did.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, when you consider 2020 and like COVID, like trust of science and all that, I mean, everything that we lived through, I mean, that's the net result, right, of him destroying peer-reviewed science. Okay. We also discussed after I think we determined we were going to play the video that we wanted to talk about his childhood a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's start there so we're not backtracking after we play the video. So what we covered on the last time is I don't recall remember how deep I went. I know you watched the episode to prepare for this, but I don't recall exactly how deep I went into his childhood. But he grew up in a village in Czechoslovakia. Very poor Jewish village, like dirt floor in his in his house, single room, like one bed that his whole family slept in, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, really poor. And it's certainly, Ghislaine Maxwell is not some heiress. Her father was rags to riches. His story is absolutely started with nothing. He was born in 1923. he has had about 9 different names before he finally settled on Robert Maxwell.
Yep.
And there's a really good reason for it. And that's why I like this backstory. So his birth name is Abraham Lieb Hoch, which I'm trying to do the German pronunciation, spelled H-O-C-H. He's born in 1923.
Yep.
The town he's born in is called Slatinsky Doli, which is part of Czechoslovakia at the time, but it's actually now part of it's on the Ukrainian steppes. Yeah. And that area was really dirt poor. I mean, literally, this is a in the early 20th century, they're living like they were in the Middle Ages. It's a Jewish family. You've got pogroms going through all the time, where these bandits would come in there and just the Cossacks would come in and ransack the towns periodically. But this particular area, the name of the tribe of people is called the Ruthenians, and most of the surrounding people would call them inferior. His dad's, this guy, it's called Mihel the Strong. He's about 6'5", a big dude back then, one of the biggest, strongest guys in the whole region. And Maxwell himself grew to be about 6'2". And he's a pretty good athlete growing up. His mom was like self-educated. She could actually read books. Most people couldn't. And basically that gets him to start studying with the rabbis. And because he was a good student as well. One of the first things that happens is his parents have to register him with the Czech authorities. And Abraham's not a very good Czech name. And we're getting pretty close to Hitler coming into power. And they're smart enough to realize you probably don't want to have to go through checkpoints with a Jewish name. Fair enough. So he changes his name next to Jan Abraham Ludwig. And he kind of, get to about 10 years old to be a teenager. He's going to school at one of the rabbinical schools, and basically he starts skipping classes to start selling jewelry. He's been a businessman forever. He's always been a hustler. He could find it. The Nazis invade Czechoslovakia in 1939. He's 16 years old, and this guy hates the Nazis. So he cuts his locks. It's Jewish. What do they call them? Dreidels? Is that right? I don't know. Whatever those they call those.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, drops out of his Shiva school and then goes to fight with the Czech army, as you mentioned, and goes to fight the Nazis. A couple stories about him escaping Nazi capture. Ends up in England and joins a former Czechoslovakian unit. The Brits don't trust Czechs. They don't trust anybody. I mean, they're still, to them, they're still Germans. So most of what this unit does is manual labor. So he decides he really wants to be English. You mentioned that last week, that his mom inspired that, and I think that's probably accurate.
Yeah, his mom told him that he should do everything he can to try to be British, because like the British people were considered like the sophisticated people in Europe, right? Which is funny because I feel like a lot of Americans equate like being French with being sophisticated, and I think that's how the British kind of viewed it too. Like there is an incestuous relationship between the British elite and the French elite, and hundreds of years ago, the British elite were all trying to be the British aristocracy were all trying to be French. They were like adopting French language, and they were speaking French, and they were French culture was very prevalent among the British aristocracy. Like the powdered wigs and the tights and all that all came from France.
Well, that's really just old money versus new money.
Yeah,
because the English were late to the European conquest game. They were new money, and new money always tries to emulate old money. Like that's part of human history. We saw that in America. So Maxwell's, like I said, he's a what's the word, polyglot. He learns English like in 6 weeks, and he learns it by listening to Winston Churchill, so could almost pass as an Englishman, but he always tried to imitate Churchill's speaking patterns. His next name changes to something called Ivan Dumaria, which is a French cigarette brand, which is not exactly what you want to do if you want to become an Englishman. You don't take on a French last name. Somehow, through connections, some say he had some kind of an affair with an older woman that knew a brigadier general. He gets put into a real English unit and gets promoted to lieutenant really fast. He's an outstanding soldier. some of the stories, depending on which source you're looking at, makes it seem like the guy's almost bulletproof and absolutely fearless. The truth of it, the part of that's true, but at the end of the day, once he gets into a command, he becomes one of the most vicious British soldiers. Yeah, he's killing prisoners of war. He doesn't take surrenders. He's shelling civilians, shooting mayors. All this stuff happens.
It's very ruthless. He has a very ruthless nature about him.
Uh-huh. So he changes his name to, here's one fun one, Leslie Smith. The British Army wanted him to change that because, for whatever reason, they thought he'd have a future in espionage. This is 1944, so the war's still going on. He gets stationed over in Paris, and that's when he starts getting into espionage. Ends up changing his name to Private Jones when he goes to Paris. And he's doing some illegal stuff. Well, you're really not supposed to wear a foreign soldier's uniform. That's considered really bad form, even in World War II. He's doing it. And he's working his way around Paris. That's where he meets his wife, and Elizabeth Jenny Jean Maynard. And she would change her name to Betty when she moved to England.
French Protestant. So there's another like French British connection.
Yeah, very much so. Then they get married in 1945. He's working behind enemy lines. He earns a military cross, and it sounds like he earned it. There's other stories that say that he was disobeying orders, but his commanding officer is the one who recommended him for the military cross. So you can draw your own conclusion. Finds out his mom and sister are killed at Auschwitz. Later found out that almost his entire family is killed at Auschwitz. Did find a couple of his sisters later on and moved him to America. But now he's ticked off even more. He just becomes a war machine, killing prisoners, killed civilians, war crimes by definition. The war ends and he's in occupied Berlin, and that's where the intel stuff really begins.
Yeah, well, and so the thank you for running us through that. And the interesting takeaway is that as his even his Wikipedia page says, he is technically Ukrainian because he was born in a village that is now in present day Ukraine. So by modern national boundary lines, he would be considered Ukrainian.
Yeah, how's that work? How's that work? Is your nationality what the border said when you were born, or what they are today?
Well, I think it's like what the border was when you're born. But I'm just saying that according to the current fake Ukraine national borders that were established, when the Soviet Union collapsed after Maxwell died, or I guess right around when Maxwell died, he'd be considered Ukrainian.
To me, the big takeaway of his background is what a shithole that place where he grew up was.
Yeah. Well, and what's important to remember is that Ukraine is really the Ukraine. That's what it's. I mean, throughout your entire life and my entire life, it was always referred to. And what, as Vladimir Putin explained to Tucker Carlson in their interview, that Ukrainian means borderlands. And so the fact that he grew up in this little village, which the biographies that I read about him described how this village was like every generation, it was part of a different country. It was first it was part of Czech, then it was part of Poland, then it was part of Romania, then it was part of Ukraine. So it literally is the borderlands. He's living in the borderlands there. He's living in the Ukraine. It just happened to be Czech when he was born.
One of the best things that ever happened to him was when Hitler first invades. The Nazis give that territory to Hungary, so they didn't have to suffer the same persecution as had they been in any other country. Because at the time, for a time, when the Hungarians were friendly with the Nazis, so you weren't getting sent to camps from where they were from initially. Obviously, that changed.
Yeah, because in Hungary, they didn't send him to the camps, I don't think, until like 1945, and that was when Soros, a very young Soros, helped them do that.
Yeah, that's right, and that's how he was able to escape and get to England. Is because otherwise this story never happens.
Correct. So with that said, let's jump in and play this. I've started it's around the 5-minute mark, so there might be a little bit of a rough transition here. But basically, you and the Colonel had finished kind of doing the introduction, which we've already done here. And then this is when you start talking about the intelligence publishing stuff. There'll be a little bit of like overlap from the stuff we talked about last time, but I think that that just makes it all cohesive. So If you want me to pause because you and I discussed maybe stopping it and having some back and forth, just say something.
Yeah, let me just make one point before he started. Is when he's working in occupied Germany, he decides to, well, he learns Russian in a matter of weeks. And that's going to tie into this whole science part of it. Because the guy can pick up languages like nothing. And so he now knows Russian. And keep that in mind as we go through the science part, because it's a big deal.
In America, it's right there.
Yeah.
So this story, the chapter of the story that I want to focus on here starts in 1946. Robert Maxwell is 23 years old, and he's working in Berlin as an intelligence officer. This is post-World War II. You have all the German scientists, having been Operation Paperclip to America and other places, and we're about to hit a scientific boom in the world. Science is about to change. You have real top scientists in England, like Alexander Fleming, who invented penicillin, and a guy named Charles Galton Darwin, the grandson of Charles Darwin, who's an interesting name. We'll get to him one of these days. They were really concerned that British science was world-class, but their publishing was dismal. And it was true. You had to, it's one thing to do the science. The other is how do you communicate it to other scientists in the rest of the world. So the government solution was to pair a venerable British publishing house called Butterworth's with the renowned German publisher Springer, so they could draw on the latter's expertise. The Butterworth directors were ex-British intelligence officers, and so they ended up hiring Maxwell to help manage the company. And there's another ex-spook they hired by the name of Paul Rosbaud. He was a metallurgist who spent the war passing Nazi nuclear secrets to the British through the French and Dutch resistance. So he's the science editor, and Maxwell's in there to manage the business.
So there's a lot of overlap.
It didn't last long.
You've already covered.
Would leave the firm.
Yeah, but this is good. This is good, concise review, because like we talked about Paul Rosbaud last time, and how he and Maxwell partnered together for a minute to create the publishing company that would become Pergamon. But this publishing company was in Germany, existed. I think it was created in the 1840s or 1830s, so it was around for about 120 years when Maxwell acquired it and became partners with Paul Rosbaud.
Yeah, this German publishing company has been doing scientific, publishing for a long time. They've got the expertise, far more advanced than anywhere else on the continent. And obviously, we're in post-war Germany, and you're able to pick up assets on the cheap.
Yeah, good point.
7 or 8 years later, because he found Maxwell to be rather an unsavory character.
No kidding.
About 5 years into that, Maxwell pays about £13,000 and buys a controlling interest in the company. And him and Rosbaud took it and run. He calls the new venture the Pergamon Press.
Can you stop it?
And
so this is one of the points of contention. Where did £13,000 come from? Did it come from MI6 or other sources? That's one of the things we don't know.
Yeah. So like according to official stories, the claim, like this article going back to to 2000, is that it was MI6 that gave him the money to establish himself in publishing. They bankrolled him in the early 1950s, and it was believed it would be a good chance to obtain intelligence about Soviet scientific work. Maxwell's side of the bargain was to pass on information to help MI6 contact and recruit scientists.
And the reason that makes sense is because Maxwell had already been working with British intelligence during the war and also post-war in occupied Germany. He's learned Russian. He's made a bunch of Russian contacts, post-World War II. And when it became time, and the big event's coming, Sputnik, which really sets this whole thing on fire, he actually knew the people to call. And so does it make sense that MI6 would sponsor him to do that? Yeah, it absolutely does. But there's no evidence of that. So it's conjecture.
It's an interesting choice of names, the Pergamon Press, because Pergamon was an ancient Turkish city that was known for human sacrifices to loosen Baal.
Exactly.
There's also something in the Bible, or biblical stories about how Jesus wrote letters to Pergamon, basically warning them against their sexual depravity. And of course, the city of Pergamon, or the kingdom of Pergamon, it was at the time, all their coins had snakes on there as a symbol. So it's an interesting choice of names for his company. I thought it was
totally on purpose.
Well, the timing couldn't have been better for him to get involved in this. Like I said, science is about to explode. You familiar with Vannevar Bush?
No.
Vannevar Bush would basically, he was the president of the Carnegie Institution in Washington, science. And we know the Carnegies are knee deep in everything the Rockefellers did. He would be the head of the U.S. Office of Scientific Research and Development in World War II. And he was the early administrator of the Manhattan Project. Also, he was the founder of a company that came to be known as Raytheon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He just had a real famous quote. He said, "Science has been in the wings. It should be brought to the center of the stage, for it lies much in our hope for the future." So Vannevar Bush was really pushing the science post-World War II. And along comes Maxwell to help publish the science or help take it over.
Pause.
Interesting thing happens in 1957. Sputnik gets launched by the Russians.
Yeah, so we're post-World War II, and the United States printing money all over the world in the Marshall Plan, and the Department of Defense is realizing we're in a race with the Russians, and they're sending out all kinds of money to, for scientific research, because the thing with the Germans, German research was ahead of everyone else, and now we're getting the German scientists. We're starting to learn this stuff. Department of Defense is pumping a ton of money into scientific research. Marshall Plan is doing the same. There is money everywhere flowing if you're a scientist. And scientists usually didn't make very much money back then. They spent all their time in labs and stuff like that, and went blind by the age of 50 because they poorly lit rooms doing all their research. This is changing right now. The money is going to be there, and it's all government, freshly printed stuff post World War II.
Yeah, and at some point we should talk about Hoffenberg. I don't know if you have him on your mind map.
I know who he is, but go ahead. And I don't have anything worth talking about. So go, yeah.
Well, let's play this a little more, and then because you're about to talk about Sputnik, and then we'll kind of we'll double back if we need to and talk about Hoffenberg.
Go back 15 seconds to lead into Sputnik, please.
I think I already did.
Okay, cool.
If not, I'll do it.
So Vannevar Bush was really pushing the science post World War II, and along comes Maxwell to help publish the science or help take it over. Interesting thing happens in 1957. Sputnik gets launched by the Russians, and the Western scientists are scrambling to catch up with Russia and find all this research. And they found out that, Maxwell had already negotiated an exclusive English language deal to publish the Russian Academy of Sciences journal earlier in the decade. So you mentioned his Russian mafia background. Well, he apparently kept those Russian contacts.
He most definitely did.
Yeah. So he basically, that part of the story I think is fascinating, and I want to read more about it. But so by 1959, Pergamon is publishing about 40 journals, scientific journals, and about 6 years later, published about 150. And the way he went about it's interesting. Any type of field of science, Maxwell would show up at the conferences, and he'd wine and dine these scientists, and he'd give them, create a new journal, because you had to have a journal if you're going to have a field of science, and he'd get some renowned academic to become the head of that, and through that, Maxwell would be able to control the funding and the research itself.
I was going to say, let me clarify that. You have to have a journal so you can control the science.
That's exactly right. And the peer review, this quote unquote peer review process, it hasn't always been that way. Science used to be, pretty pure. You put your idea out.
It's a form of control.
Yeah. Well, they bastardized it. Really fun. I'm jumping ahead here, but it's good that you talk about control. Maxwell also would buy McGraw-Hill, which is a publisher of our textbooks in 1989. And
yes.
So that's everything our kids are learning from is by a company that Maxwell had purchased and corrected. The rest of the business model is interesting. So most scientific research gets its funding where?
From the government.
Exactly. Government, sometimes you get NGOs and foundations, it's mostly from the government. So you throw this government money at some research. Scientists, if they want to push forward their career, they basically get judged by how often you publish and also how often you review. Yep, it's like statistics on the back of a baseball card. That's what goes on your resume. How much have you published? And then that's how they control. You know, if you can't,
not unlike professors.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's not just pure science. I mean, it's the soft sciences, the hard sciences, the made up sciences like climate science, all of that stuff. It's the exact same pattern. So the government funds it. Pergamon will turn around and create a journal and control what gets put in it. Then Pergamon turns around and sells the academic journals to universities who have no choice but to buy them. It's an absolute monopoly. And who funds the universities? It's the government again.
Right.
The government funds the research. Pergamon takes a cut. It gets a commission.
Can you pause that?
To put the research back to the universities. And
so to explain that business model a little more simply, used to be this, there was no money in this. You know, you publish a journal and it'd be distributed for free. And this is where Maxwell's genius comes in. He goes, really? Free? We're going to keep doing that? So he creates this new business model. Now, the university's always, in a chat, McModern said the university's funded too. Well, not really. They get a lot of government money, and they also pass their costs on to the students. So you get scientists who create their research, and they're funded by the government. They have to give it to the publishers for free because your research doesn't get out there unless it's published. The publishers then turn around and put them up for peer review, which is checking the validity. Peer review process is done by other scientists in the field for free. Because if you peer review stuff, your work gets pushed as well. That's the problem with the business model. Then Maxwell sends it back to government-funded schools where they have to buy every single peer-reviewed journal in any field of science, because you can't just skip one. You need to know what everybody and if you're in academia, you've got to know what everybody is saying in these peer-reviewed journals. So to sum it up, he gets his product for free. He gets most of the work done for free, the peer review process. All that stuff was funded by the government in the first place. Then he turns around and sells it back to the government without adding any value besides maybe checking the spelling. That's the business model that Robert Maxwell invented. And it's corrupt. You know, that's why you got gatekeepers in any form of science. You can determine what gets published, what doesn't. And it's a real big problem in some fields. I mean, climate change is a great example. Because if you have a non-globalist version of, you know, climate change, you don't get published, you don't get research dollars, you don't get any of it. So Maxwell set up this peer review process as being the gatekeepers of what the official narrative needs to be. And that's not just climate change, it's in a lot of fields of science. And if you have friends that are in science, they'll tell you this has been happening for decades and decades. And Maxwell is the guy who changed that business model. So to me, this is the biggest crime he ever committed. Because, I mean, how did we learn science, Gordon, growing up? It was
scientific method, right? Scientific method, and yeah.
And this is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
All right. So did I explain that business model pretty well? You get a you get a government-funded product. Pretty much everyone who does the work, you don't have to pay. Then you turn around and sell it right back to the same people who gave you all this stuff for free. It's an incredibly lucrative business.
Yeah, and we all lived through it in 2020 with COVID. I think everyone kind of got like a front row seat to what that grift really looked like, because most people, or a lot of people, everyone listening to this, I would say, or most people listening to this recognize that something was wrong, that they were lying to us. We weren't really getting the facts. The things that they were telling us didn't map onto reality. And yet they were telling us to shut up and trust the science. Meanwhile, you're just hearing about all this money that's changing hands and moving around, enormous sums of money. And that's to your point.
Yeah, and the people who did actually dare to question the experts, they lost their jobs. Yeah, they were threatened with loss of their licenses. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He's now part of Trump. Well, he's working with Bobby Kennedy. And by the way, one more shout out to Bobby Kennedy. He is doing such an awesome job at Make America Healthy Again. I love that guy, the work he's doing. We've had some great, not just cancer and stuff like that. Yeah, I think I just saw today that they're going to actually be looking to cancel all COVID vaccines for children, pulling it off.
Oh, thank God. Yes. Yeah. I saw that Moderna got like an approval a couple of weeks ago for a new vaccine for like newborns, like COVID vaccine. It's despicable. So I'm glad that he's on that and he's looking to shut it down.
Well, that's really why you and I met. There's all that between that and the steal of the 2020 election. That's why we started corresponding.
Exactly. Yeah. So they had a profound effect on the world for sure.
And like I said, if you had honest, peer-reviewed science, this wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have people be able to gatekeep who gets to speak and who doesn't. You'd actually have a firm exchange of ideas, and that's how you've come to a better conclusion. And that's the thing that ticks me off the most about the COVID is our government health officials. Their only job is to give us all the information so we have enough information to make an informed decision about our own health. We're Americans. The government doesn't get to tell us what to do. And they did not do that. They silenced voices that, basically were against what the official public narrative was. And who formed that narrative? And why did we get it so widespread throughout everybody who worked in the government and the bureaucracies? And that's scary how they were able to do that and censor anybody who disagreed. So, and again, I think this all starts with Robert Maxwell. And that's why I think he's the biggest supervillain.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you asked me to go to about 13:11, so that's about 90 more seconds on this video. So let's finish this up, and then we can keep going.
Cool.
That's the system that Maxwell built, and it's an incredible profit margin.
And it comes back to the control, as far as I'm concerned, too, because if you control the science, you can create the fake science like climate. But you couldn't do climate if you didn't already control the system, because it doesn't stand on its own.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But my mind kind of explodes when you think about just how much control of so much that the implications of this, and how much this scheme alone, not to mention some of the other stuff we're going to talk about with Maxwell, how much this scheme has changed so many aspects of the world.
Correct.
And still does to this very day. And I say to this very day, Maxwell's gone now, but his company was purchased by a Dutch firm called Elsevier. Elsevier now controls somewhere around 45% of all peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals. One Dutch company, and it's got a very interesting history of its own. I'm about halfway through researching that. It's they do billions a year in profits, and the profit margins are some of the best, one of the most profitable companies in the world. Just basically selling research back to universities.
So that was the timestamp you gave me. I don't know if you want us to keep listening, but
no, that's good. That covered what we need. I mean, that's basically, we know what Maxwell did.
Yeah, exactly. So we can talk about Hoffenberg, but that might take us a little bit out of the science and research rabbit hole. So let's stay in the science and research rabbit hole and finish this out, and then we can back out and go to Hoffenberg, because I think that's actually pretty fascinating. That also takes us to Jeffrey Epstein. It takes us from Robert Maxwell to Jeffrey Epstein. So let's stay in the science and research. And what else do you have on that?
Well, it's interesting. Pergamon makes a lot of money. He becomes a billionaire. We get to the 1960s where he's just killing it. And he tried to buy a couple. He tries to get into the news business. A little bit of crossover there. Oh, here's where it gets fun.
Yeah, he tries to buy the Times, I think. He tried to put a bid in to buy the Times when the Times went up for sale. And
Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch kept beating him out for a couple of things. And that's one of the funny stories about this. He always wanted to beat Rupert Murdoch, and Murdoch's solution was who? Who's this Maxwell guy? I don't know him. Yeah. It was a bit of a diss. Where it gets interesting. So we're in the 1960s, and Maxwell's made his money. And I'll tie it back to the science, but he moves his family away from London to Oxford. Their family life sucks at this point. He had a son who died was in a coma and died, and basically the 9 children. Ghislaine was the 8th of the 9. She was like the favorite, but their whole family became incredibly dysfunctional. Betty and Robert stopped talking, but he did promise her early on, back when he was still in the military in 1944. He said, "I'm going to be wealthy, and someday I'm going to be prime minister." Well, he got the wealthy part done. So the guy runs for parliament in Buckingham district and wins in 1964 as a member of the Labour Party. That's basically the British version of sort of the Democrats. Maxwell is an avowed socialist, supposedly, but he can't stand unions. This is an issue. So he's part of this movement to switch to, it's called the New Labour, where they try to get rid of the unions. And that's because he's a capitalist, or whatever you want to call him. He does not like unions. He wants to be the guy making decisions. He even sells his Rolls Royce and buys a Land Rover to be one of the people. Doesn't work. Land Rover's a pretty high-end car. That's when he's having the fights with Rupert Murdoch, trying to buy News of the World and The Sun in London. Murdoch beats him both times. He had deeper pockets. So here's where he gets in trouble in 1969. He tries to sell the Pergamon Press to an American billionaire by the name of Saul Steinberg. And Maxwell overstates the value of the company. He gets investigated by the British regulators. They find fraudulent accounting. The investigation finds, and this is a direct quote, you'll love this. This is the British version of the SEC. They say, Robert Maxwell is not someone who can be trusted with the stewardship of a public company. He's been cooking the books. He gets removed from the board of directors of his own company, and then comes back 5 years later and somehow regains the company. And we don't know how that happened exactly. I haven't found out. He gets the nickname of, you're going to love this, the bouncing check, because he's speculative lucky. Sorry, they thought it was funny at the time. And that's when he buys the Mirror, which is Britain's largest left-leaning newspaper. And he spent the entire time running their editorial section and just attacking all the union organizers. And the whole time, he's really good at running newspapers. He made it profitable. But his staff. Yeah,
a lot of tabloids, by the way, like under the Mirror groups. Like the Mirror group would be like a holding company, basically, as I understand it, of multiple media outlets. And a lot of those media outlets were tabloids. I think the Mirror was like the largest circulated paper at the time in Britain, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it did grow to that. Yeah, I agree there. But you know what's interesting about that? We mentioned the tabloids. Well, how much of a connection between American tabloids and Mockingbird Media have we discovered in all our research?
They're gestating twins in the same womb, right?
It's good. 2 wings of the same bird, huh?
Yeah.
You got to think MI6 is doing the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and like there are a lot of parallels that I see between Maxwell and Trump, which some people are gonna like sneer when I say that, but his mother telling him to try to be more British. Well, as we covered on one of the early episodes of this show, Trump's mother had a similar affinity for the royal family and the pomp and the circumstance of the British royalty. Like she was always very fascinated by it, would always watch all the specials they had on television. And that kind of is what imbued Trump with his sense of like elegance and refinement, like in terms of like his taste, which is why he wasn't happy just building, like apartments in Queens. It's like he wanted to move into Manhattan and build like high rises.
And you had to have the gold awnings and everything like that. Everything just
the glitz and the glam and all that. And so like he got that from his mother, whereas his father never really had any desire to embark on those kind of development deals. And then the tabloid stuff. I mean, Trump used to use tabloids all the time. He'd pick up the phone and call the tabloids and try to feed them information about himself, so that people that he was negotiating deals with would read that information and think that he's about to zig when he was really going to zag. and just to get like an advantage, or he just do it just to get people talking about him, like he would say, no press is bad press. If people, even if everyone out there is hating on me, at least they're talking about me. So.
And I'm drawing a blank on who's the National Enquirer guy that was involved in Spygate back in 2016. There was some mention of that this came into play. The tabloids did, and I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's been a while, but
yeah, you're right.
Do you remember who I'm talking about? We're both going to kick ourselves when we get off the air. We're going to remember the name.
Yeah, but he was like he would buy up the guy you're talking about would buy up stories as soon as you would hear about it. He would pay the person to like get the exclusive rights, not knowing if the story was going to pay dividends or not. And then most of them would go nowhere. But if they would pay dividends, then he would have the exclusive rights to the story, and then he would run with it. But like anytime you'd hear any rumors, he would contact the person, buy the story, pay them, sign a contract like NDA. That's my story now. And then, and he also would use that to leverage, like I'll bury the story for you. Like he would use
exactly.
it as
I was going to say that you can quash a story if you've got the one. Yeah, that's exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of that's been going on, and I'd imagine. I think it was probably invented in England where Maxwell's got his start. So
yeah. Yep.
And probably a decade or two before Trump.
Yep.
So do you want to jump into so to me, when he starts getting into the media stuff like that, he loses interest in the peer reviewed and the science process. He's already done his damage. Do you want to, there's someone you wanted to jump into and talk about before we leave the science part of it. So go, because in 1969, he sells Pergamon to a American billionaire. I talked about that. So before we leave that, is there someone you wanted to bring up?
Let me see. I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of that stuff, and you touched on some of it. Yeah, I mean his connections to. Let me just share my screen here and pull it up. So his connections to this guy, Ari bin Menashe. And for those who didn't catch Breaking History last week, Matt was out, so I just spent the episode doing like a deep dive on the theft of the Promise software and how that all went down. Which Robert Maxwell isn't directly connected in that story, but he is connected to the people in the story, particularly this guy, Ari bin Menashe, who's a Mossad operative, who was a part of the op to steal this database software. Basically, it's like a database AI made in the 70s and 80s to help with prosecutors and like managing their caseloads. And the TLDR is that Israel, pretending to be a prospective buyer of this software, stole it from the Department of Justice. That's the official story. I mean, I think it was probably just given to them, and they gave it to their people. Their people dismantled it, put it back together so it looked like it was a unique software that they had made themselves. And then they brought in a third party, this guy, Yehuda bin Hanan, who ran a small computer company in California, but he had served in the IDF, and he was, an Israeli citizen. Brought him in to install a trap door onto it, and the reason they wanted to go third party is they didn't want it to lead back to them. So then they then go and sell that software to a number of governments, and every single government they sell it to, they then get access to all their investigations, all their prosecutors' files, everything that the prosecutors know about any potential person they're looking into, not even people who are formally charged with things, but people who are just being investigated, they know about it. And that I think is probably a much richer well of blackmail material than anything that a honeypot like Jeffrey Epstein would have acquired. Although I do think that I mean, obviously Herbert Hoover used to do it. So I think that the idea that Epstein was a honeypot, I think, is a very, very plausible and likely scenario. But interesting story with the Promise software. But if you want the deep dive, go listen to Breaking History from last week, because that's its own long story.
Let me ask you this: do you have Raphael Etienne, the idea?
You've got Rafi Eitan. Yeah, right here.
How do you say it? Eitan? Okay.
I assign my own pronunciations to these words at this point, but I call him Eitan, but I don't know if it's if I'm saying it right. But my understanding is that Rafi Eitan was the handler to Ari bin Menashe, because bin Menashe had been become persona non grata. He had been fired from Mossad, like many other. There was like a big purge and he was fired along with a lot of other people from Mossad. And the way it's told is that once you get fired from Mossad, you basically like can't get a job doing anything other than like teaching kindergarten. And so he was kind of desperate for work, and Rafi Eitan basically came to him and said, "Hey, if you want your foot back in the door with Mossad, help me figure this out. I need to put a trap door on this software." And so he put Ben Menashe in charge of doing that. Now, Ben Menashe was also purportedly Robert Maxwell's handler. Like he was like Robert Maxwell's point of contact, even according to him, like with the Mossad. And so he has become a big source of information for the claims that Robert Maxwell was working for Mossad.
Well, here's the best example. I mean, so let's talk about that. You know, when did Maxwell start with Mossad? Because we know it did happen. He did have a ton of connections. But did it happen back in the 1950s or 60s, or did it not start until the 1980s when Maxwell rediscovers his Jewishness, starts investing a ton of money in Israel, becomes the biggest investor in the entire country, buying into high tech, pharma, bought newspapers, then apparently becomes an informer for Mossad in 1986. Now we're pretty sure that all we know the investments happened, and the Mossad think. We know he was an informer in Mossad in 1986. So the only question is, did he start right then, or did it happen earlier? And I don't think we're ever going to know the actual answer to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But the story I love, and the one that really tells you that for sure, is have you run into Mordecai Vanunu?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's just a nuclear scientist. He comes to England. He's going to basically tell a bunch of British journalists he's going to spill the fact that Israel has a nuclear power.
Dude, he used to follow me on X until they kicked like somebody went and shut his X account down. Like he had an X account. He used to follow me on X, and then
Mordecai Vanunu.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He because you know he lives under like he lives as like a prisoner of Israel in Israel, and apparently he's not.
Yeah, he did 18 years in prison because here's Robert Maxwell, who runs newspapers. He has an informant comes to him, and he, instead of protecting his source, he does just the opposite, and he runs to the Israelis, says, "You got to stop this guy," and they arrest him. So,
yeah. So Mordecai Vanunu, for those, and I can't recall how. I think I mentioned this in passing in the last episode, but didn't go down the rabbit hole. But defects from Israel in 1986. He's a nuclear scientist. He had spent months like taking pictures, gathering evidence, taking video, like proving that that Israel had nuclear facilities, that they were developing nuclear weapons. They had nuclear weapons. He goes to Britain and says, I'm looking for honest journalists to put this story out. And then Robert Maxwell uses his like tabloids and all of his newspapers to say, oh, okay. They start running. They hear about this because he's going around like courting journalists. They hear about this story that's coming out. And so Robert Maxwell then uses his newspapers to slander Vanunu and be like, this guy's a crackpot. He's a joke. He's a clown. Nobody should listen to him.
Yeah. And I think it's an important part of the story. So I'm glad we touched on it. So here's you're jumping into the Promise software, and I've heard the way you presented it, and I know your sources. And that's really what I was saying at the beginning of the show is, so there have been investigations into the whole Promise software scandal. And to me, House Judiciary in 1992, decade after the fact, did a real investigation. Now, you and I both know that what comes out of the House Judiciary Committee sometimes is, really uncovers the truth, and sometimes it buries the truth. And, we need to look at other sources. To me, the best article I found on it that appears to be the most balanced is the one from Wired magazine, and I can pull that up here in a second if you want to let me share.
Yeah, share, and I'll pull it up.
Yeah, I got it right here. It takes me 2 seconds. So this is a Wired magazine called the Inslaw Octopus. Inslaw, of course, was the company that founded the Promise software.
Yeah, and that company created by what's his name, Bill.
We've got it here. Hamilton.
Bill Hamilton. Yeah, and Bill Hamilton was a former spook from Vietnam who worked with William Cooper in Vietnam, and I mean, he was doing all kinds. I mean, he was definitely some sort of an intelligence officer, asset operator, whatever.
And Cooper's one heck of a character.
Yeah, and Cooper. I mean, he's working with William Cooper from CIA. So
just to read the beginning of it: software piracy, conspiracy, cover-up, stonewalling. The House Judiciary Committee lists these crimes as among the possible violations perpetrated by high-level justice officials and private individuals. You're talking about Reagan-Bush Department of Justice, basically Edward Meese. And now we know these are the same people that are running Iran-Contra. Well, Epstein gets his start in the international money laundering thing, basically facilitating these offshore trusts during Iran-Contra, and his first client coming out of that is none other than Khashoggi, who is part of the Iran-Contra.
Yep.
Well, Meese is doing this stuff, and it's totally connected. And that's where the dots start to connect between Maxwell and Epstein. Is right here.
Yeah, and Edwin Meese right here. Here's Edwin Meese is why is it scrolling like that now? But yeah, here's Edwin Meese, the U.S. Attorney General under Ronald Reagan, and he's the one who, as you said, you think he was the one who was running this whole promise theft op, but he obviously is also connected to Iran-Contra.
Yeah, and I'm open to all these definitions because, again, this is one of those things we're not actually going to get the 100% truth, so we just got to connect dots and draw our conclusions, but. The official House committee. Well, but I love the all the crimes they said was going on: conspiracy to commit an offense, fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of proceedings before departments, tampering with a witness, retaliation against a witness, perjury, interference with commerce by threats of violence, racketeer, RICO. I mean, all of these are things that they think that the U.S. Department of Justice was guilty of, and this is in an official House investigation. But you go through this along, we start getting into Dr. Orr, who he's working with. The reason I say Etienne, because look how they spelled it here. E-T-A, and you have it spelled E-I-T-A-N. So I don't know how to pronounce it.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. We can go down here just a little bit. Wired spent 2 years searching for the answer to the questions Insla poses. Why would justice steal promise? Well, it wasn't just to make money. Department of Justice doesn't care about profit and loss. They care about other stuff. And that's where Meese comes in. And, well, we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I bring it up because there's a couple different versions that are worth looking at too. And they lead you to slightly different conclusions about Mr. Maxwell. Baltimore Sun argues that he sold promise to intel agencies around the world. That may not be true. There's a chance that the U.S. government was the inciting agent to do this, and the Israelis got in on it later, and Maxwell did incite it. What happens is Israeli intelligence, who we've already established Maxwell had a connection with, said, look, we'd like to sell this promise software. Because remember, this is a backdoor for the U.S. to get into. If you install promise in your country, the U.S. gets to look into it. They install the backdoor. Agreed?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you purchase the promise from, it depends who you purchase the promise from. If you're purchasing it from Hadron, which is the company that was set up that was like the cutout company set up to sell this stuff, to sell this Israeli-made software. Ostensibly, it would go back to Mossad, but I mean, Mossad, CIA, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, almost the same thing. Yeah, close enough to be. I'm kissing cousins, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But here's what gets fun. If the U.S. government instigates this, and Maxwell's not part of it initially, what you see happen is Israeli intelligence politicians, then they want to sell this stuff to countries like Iraq and other places that are not friendly to Israel, because they just aren't. That's when Maxwell comes in, because here's this billionaire who's been doing business around the world for decades. He says, yeah, I know a guy in that port. I know a guy in that government. He's just the deal maker according to this version of it, and not the mastermind.
Yeah, the broker. Yeah, the broker.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that Epstein was doing for Khashoggi. Epstein wasn't a mastermind. He started working with Khashoggi before he was 30 years old. He spent 4 years at Bear Stearns. Like, look, I come from a financial services background, Gordon.
I was gonna say, it's like if anyone can speak to this, it's you. But yeah.
Well, when you're under 30 years, first of all, people with 7-figure assets, they don't start listening to a financial advisor, no matter how smart you are, until you get a couple of gray hairs. I got a couple of gray hairs, and all of a sudden my IQ goes up in everyone's mind by 10 points. So Epstein's like 28, 29 years old.
27.
Yeah, he leaves Bear Stearns because, well, he's such a bad actor. He's got no training in this stuff, but he does learn how to move the shell companies and knows how to maneuver. And he's also got the Donald Barr connection. We don't need to get into that. But all of a sudden, he's dealing with a billionaire. Well, how does that happen? Yeah, it doesn't happen in financial services. I spent 20 years before, I could, it took me at least 10 years before people with 10 or 20 million would even return the call, because you're too wet behind the ears. A guy with 4 years of experience and his lack of credentials, there's no way he's going to be in that position unless Bear Stearns realizes that his securities licenses aren't, because he's such a shady character and the stuff he learned and done with shell and offshore trusts, unless Bear Stearns kept running the same deals and used him as a third-party cutout.
That's
which means
kind of what I think happened, yeah.
Yeah, which means Bear Stearns is actually the bad actor here back in the Khashoggi days and not Epstein himself.
Yeah, and he's kind of a vehicle. He's like a tool that they're using, basically, right?
Very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So this actually now we are getting into Stephen Hoffenberg, because this is where the Stephen Hoffenberg comes into the story. And for those who aren't familiar with who Stephen Hoffenberg is, let's talk about him for a quick second. Let me see. Share my screen. So Stephen Hoffenberg. He was the CEO, president, chairman of Towers Financial Corporation, a debt collection agency, which was later discovered to be a Ponzi scheme. It was the biggest Ponzi scheme in American history up until Bernie Madoff. And Bernie Madoff supplanted this guy as the biggest Ponzi scheme in American history. 1993, he rescued the New York Post from bankruptcy. Briefly owned the
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
The biggest Ponzi scheme in American history is called the Federal Reserve Bank.
Well, there you go. Yes. Yeah. But I'm saying according to like the official normie narrative. You
know me. I can't let that one slide. That's it's my pet peeve.
Of course. So January 93, he buys the New York Post. He owns it for 2 months, and then his own scandal, his Ponzi scheme, gets exposed. It collapses in March or like the spring of 1993. And he's destroyed basically. I believe. So what happens is that, but this guy had a criminal history. In 1971, he pleads guilty to attempted second-degree larceny for trying to steal a diamond in New York City. So he's kind of he's a lifelong kind of lowlife. But let's see, the official story is that Hoffenberg's the one who actually gives this anecdote about Epstein being thrown out of Bear Stearns. And according to Hoffenberg, he was blackballed, like Epstein was blackballed, which forced him to go to London, forces him to go to Britain. And that's where he meets Maxwell, is in Britain. But before he meets Maxwell, he meets this other guy named Douglas Leese. And so Douglas Leese he inherited his father's rack and pinion steering company. And for those who wonder what that is, if you're looking at the screen right now, this is a rack and pinion. It's a type of linear actuator, and basically it takes circular gears and it turns rotational motion into linear motion, like cars. So that's a pretty good business to be in, in the mid 20th century. So Douglas Leese basically takes that business and parlays it, and then starts dabbling in like defense contracting and becomes like a broker in like the defense contracting world. So here's a picture of him from, I believe I want to say this is maybe the 1980s. But this is him second from the left, Douglas Leese. And so Leese is the one, as I understand it, who introduces Epstein to Maxwell. And the story goes that Epstein was dating, let's see. So according to Leese's son, Julian, who at the time was only 16, Let's see. But Julian did an interview on a podcast in 2020 and called Defiance, and discloses a lot of this stuff. I'm just reading through notes here. He said Julian Lee says that Epstein was dating this girl named Paula Heel Fisher, who met Julian's brother Nick Lease at a birthday party for a Texas oil man. Her and Jeffrey were about to go to London, and they asked if they could look up the leases. When they got there, the leases said fine. So they come to London, they look up the leases, they get invited over for drinks. But what Lease is told by Hoffenberg tells him, he says, this kid, let's see. Yeah, so Hoffenberg tells Lease, or no, I'm sorry, Lease introduces Epstein to Hoffenberg. I got my notes mixed up here. And Lease tells Hoffenberg from Bear Stearns, he says, this kid is a genius. He's great at selling securities, and he has no moral compass. That's the quote. And so he's the ideal guy. All right. So then, according to Hoffenberg, because Hoffenberg has given interviews about this, because Hoffenberg was convicted. He went to prison for 18 years. He's given interviews about this ever since. Epstein presents himself to Ghislaine Maxwell and Robert Maxwell together. He presents himself as a Wall Street investment banker, a financial expert that could advise them on the problems they were having in Wall Street with financial stress. But Epstein was saying that because the Maxwells needed a $50 million bridge loan, and Epstein helped them get that bridge loan. And so after that, Maxwell helps Epstein get a job, because Epstein was looking for a job at that point. He left Bear Stearns. And let's see, Epstein was basically, that was where Maxwell put his daughter under Epstein's care. And this is all according to Ben Menashe, the other guy, the Mossad agent that I was talking about. And this is where you get Adnan Khashoggi in the mix, because then Epstein all of a sudden is his only client is Adnan Khashoggi, and Adnan Khashoggi is the world's leading gun runner. Is that right?
Well, he's the biggest arms dealer in the world, and by a long shot. He actually was moving more product from Boeing than any other source, and you could say the same about a number of other manufacturers. But yeah, he was the biggest arms dealer in the world.
Yeah. And so the time we're talking about here is we're talking about 1987 to 1993, because 1987, that's when Hoffenberg hires Epstein. Lease introduces him to Hoffenberg. Hoffenberg hires Epstein to come work at Towers Financial Corporation. And Epstein is working there in 1993, I believe, when this whole scandal explodes. And it's revealed that Hoffenberg is just a con man, and there's a giant Ponzi scheme, and Epstein is apparently connected to all this. He was involved in this enormous Ponzi scheme.
Gordon, when do you have Epstein starting to pal around with Ghislaine?
I have that. I believe it sounds like in this 1980, between 1987 and 1993 is my understanding, because it was when it would have been when Maxwell, the father, was still alive. So it would have been like late 80s, I believe.
Yeah. What's funny is we can't get a straight answer on how they met, and all that testimony last week that Ghislaine released, the answer still isn't there, because it's different than other answers she's had previously. Because I think that matters.
Yeah.
If you want, again, there's a lot of people out there that are saying that the whole world is run by this globalist pedophile network, and I don't think that's the case. I think the whole world's run by a bunch of scumbags, and some of them are pedophiles, and all that stuff happens. But that's not the fulcrum, is this global pedophile network. I think that part of it's just slightly overstated, although it most certainly exists. But when we're trying to nail down who Robert Maxwell is, and obviously who Epstein was, they both were more money movers and facilitators of cross-border traffic that happen to be involved in some sketchy things when it comes to. And Robert Maxwell's not really implicated in sex trafficking very much. I mean, we don't see that in any evidence. Epstein, well, there's certainly some of it. I suspect that had there ever been an investigation, which there never was a real one, And if such evidence were ever preserved, which I don't think it was after so many years, considering who the gatekeepers were on that evidence were, I think we'd find that, yeah, there's some pretty big names that are implicated, but it's not the keys to the kingdom. So to me, I've been focusing on because of that, I've been focusing more of my energy on this Russiagate stuff that's coming out. But I understand why people, want the Epstein files and all this Maxwell stuff, and that's why we're talking about it, because it's important. But I don't want to underplay, but go ahead.
So I like John, like a question that John Harold's been asking a lot is who started this whole Epstein allegation that Epstein was working for Mossad? It's an important question. It's an important question to like trace it back to its root, because you had Kash Patel going on Benny Johnson's show, I think in 2022, and kind of like promoting that theory. You had a number of people, including Don Jr. And others like in the Trump orbit, promoting it over the past year or two. Dan Bongino, I think, has been talking about it, for years. But if you look at this article published in Medium magazine back in December 23rd, 2019, this is the interview that I was referencing some of my notes from this interview. This is the interview with Stephen Hoffenberg. So Stephen Hoffenberg is actually the one who says Epstein admitted to me he was a spy. So this is the guy who purportedly started this, who starts like this theory or this rumor that Epstein is working for Mossad. Now there are other people who've corroborated that in other ways. Like Ben Menashe would be another one who, is a former Mossad agent who says that that's true, that he was doing all of that.
So here's where we got to be. Here's where we need to be very precise with our language, because I think it's obviously because Iran-Contra, Khashoggi's running the arms into Iran, and we're funneling it through Israel to Khashoggi into Iran. And Epstein is the guy setting up the offshore trust and doing the money movement for that stuff. So there's certainly a connection, but is he an agent, an operative, a contact? And a lot of these people, they know each other, but you don't necessarily work for Mossad. But you got each other on speed dial and say, hey, I'll do you a favor, you do me one. And sometimes I need to use your services. And I think that last explanation is probably closer to the truth than to say someone like Epstein was an actual agent.
Oh yeah. I've never thought that Epstein was like an agent on the direct payroll of Mossad. If anything, he would be more of like a
free agent,
a free agent contractor, or some sort of like an asset, right?
And I'd say the exact same thing about Maxwell.
Oh yeah. I think Maxwell's probably a free agent working for British intelligence, working for Mossad, working for ostensibly at some point the KGB. Like he was doing stuff. He was getting access to the highest levels of the Soviet government when nobody else in the Western intelligence agencies could do that. Like he was walking in and having meetings, I think, with Gorbachev, right?
It's that 1946 period in occupied Berlin, where all the allies were actually making those contacts, and this ties into our one of the biggest themes I talk about with the Colonel Towner is who else was there, and Alan Dulles and everyone like that was setting up Operation Paperclip, Operation Gladio, and all that. This stuff all ties in together. But I think it's important to understand who's an agent, who's an asset, and who's just a player.
Yeah. Well, do you recall in 1988 the failed hostile takeover or the failed corporate raid of Pan Am? Like there was an unsuccessful takeover of Pan Am, like a corporate raid by Towers Financial that failed because there was a terrorist bombing of Flight 103 in Lockerbie, which is, I believe, in England or Scotland.
Anybody who's been watching my work with Colonel Towner sees that Pan American shows up all over Skull and Bones. They've had so many Skull and Bones alumni have either been the board of directors of Pan Am, founders of it, left and right. It's always been a CIA op.
So apparently the person who was running point for that failed takeover, the failed hostile takeover by Towers Financial, was Jeffrey Epstein. So he was the one at Towers Financial running point on that on that play that failed.
I I've never run into that. Do you mind when we get off sending that over to me so I can take a look?
Yep, it's a 2011 Vanity Fair article entitled "The Talented Mr. Epstein." I will send that over to you.
You know what? I think I've actually heard when you say the talented Mr. Epstein, it sounds like something I've read. It sparked a memory, but I don't recall that exact story. So no, please do. I'd like to take a look at it.
Wait a minute. We might need to look at this. It says it was from 2011, but then I go and I click on it, and it says it was published in 2003. We got to look at this real quick because there's something weird happening here.
Go ahead, but save me about 5 or more minutes. I want to try to do our hard stop at 90 minutes. If we can go longer.
Yeah,
but I do want to hit on the financial fall of Mr. Maxwell.
Okay, yeah. So here's the article. I'll send this article to you if anyone wants to go check it out. It's from the March 2003 issue of Vanity Fair. So this would have been 5 years before his plea deal, with what's his name, the prosecutor from South Florida, and it says the talented Mr. Epstein. It says lately Jeffrey Epstein's high flying style has been drawing oohs and ahs. The bachelor financier lives in.
We talk about Alex Acosta, right?
Yeah, Alex Acosta. Thank you. All right, so we're not going to go through this.
By the way, I got some serious questions about how that guy got into the Trump administration.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting that like all the people who were like in the first Trump administration, the second Trump administration, seem to all have connections to Epstein. They have connections to 9/11. They have connections to. It's almost like these characters who nobody would otherwise really be that familiar with. Suddenly, we know who all these people are. We know who John Brennan is. We know who James Clapper is. We know who Jim Comey is. We know who Robert Mueller is. Robert Mueller, the one who did the 9/11 Commission report. And we know him because of the Russiagate Commission report, right?
Don't forget about Bill. Don't forget about Bill Barr, brought in to be the cover-up guy in a number of occasions, especially Iran-Contra.
Yeah. So I mean, it's worth knowing. You know, like I'm definitely going to do, I think, a Jeffrey Epstein chapter, and we'll probably dig into the Adnan Khashoggi angle there because that's going to tie into Jamal Khashoggi and what happens with him and the Saudis. But anyway, I'll kick it back to you. Take us home and what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So we get this whole really interesting life, multi-billionaire Robert Maxwell. He decides he wants to get into publishing. Now, this guy has got a gift of taking a publisher and making it profitable. It's not an easy thing to do. And he's been doing it for decades. But he's got this thing. He wants to be the biggest publishing tycoon, bigger than, of course, we talked about earlier, Rupert Murdoch. So the first thing he does is he buys Macmillan Publishing, spends $2.6 billion. The company's shareholders valued it at $1.6 billion. When he comes in there for an offer of $1 billion higher, they said, okay, we'll take it. And he borrows, this is 1998, he borrows from 44 different banks to make this purchase. And it's a desperation move based on his ego because Murdoch is, the 90s, Fox News and that whole empire has been expanding like you wouldn't believe. And Maxwell feels like he's getting lost behind. It was purely out of jealousy. He makes more bad purchases in 91, or even before the Macmillan Publishing. He buys the New York Daily News. This thing was in the New York Daily News is like one of the oldest periodicals in America, or journals. It was such a bad deal that the owners of the New York Daily News paid Maxwell $60 million to take it off his hands because he would inherit all the debt. And he was trying to make this big splash. His famous yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, he sails into New York Harbor to announce the deal. And what happens in 91? Interest rates spike and all this debt becomes a lot more expensive. Well, that's when he has to sell Pergamon Press just to keep the empire alive. So the only part of his entire financial empire that's making money is Pergamon, and he has to sell it because it's the only thing that has any value. He starts raiding the pension plans of both his U.S. and U.K. companies. Probably took about 400 million pounds from British pensioners just by raiding his own company. Steals about 750 million pounds from his various companies. And his debts are still over $1 billion. Maxwell starts gambling. He's losing it. Banks are calling in the loans. Now, out of nowhere, he's getting investigated for his war crimes. Remember, we talked about that in World War II. He talked about it, killing civilians, murdering, prisoners of war. He's been talking about that openly for 40 years. And now someone turns around and says, hey, we're going to investigate that. He knows he's going to jail at some point. He's financially destroyed. The thing, Ghislaine was okay. She was comfortable in her life for a while, but she had to do something to make a living because her dad, most of her 8 living siblings didn't do too well. She was the favorite child. So we get to 1991. He's getting investigated for war crimes, and he sets sail on the Lady Ghislaine, the ship, and they're sailing off the coast of Spain. Funny that same island has a long history of, intelligence agencies, special forces training right there. And apparently, he would fall overboard on November 1st, 1991 at 5 a.m. His body's fished out by a Spanish helicopter, and a lot of people think Mossad killed him. But he gets a hero's funeral in Israel. And there's actually stories that are coming out saying he tried to bribe Mossad. He's dealing with all these financial problems to get $400 million, but that's not really his style. That's where the stories about him start going nuts, is on his death. You get speculation everywhere. And unfortunately, it's hard to put your finger on all of the truths. Coroners are arguing whether he had a heart attack or not. And, maybe he killed himself because he didn't want to go to prison. But the nice thing is his sons, who'd been part of the business, even though he would fire them and bring them back 3 months later at half the salary, his sons are considered innocent. And Ghislaine is, nobody ever points any fingers at her at the time. And that's how he goes away. And it's an unsolved mystery.
Yeah. Well, here's another little interesting wrinkle to the whole story. Are you familiar with the reach angle of this? So Reach PLC, otherwise known as Trinity Mirror, between 1999 and 2018, is a British newspaper, magazine, and digital publisher. It is one of the UK's biggest newspaper groups, publishing 240 regional papers in addition to the national Daily Mirror, Sunday People, etc. So this is the Daily Mirror that people have probably recognized online. It says right here it was let's see, in 1984, Pergamon Holdings, a company owned by Robert Maxwell, acquired the Daily Mirror from Reed International. This was like you said earlier, Robert Maxwell wanted to become more, he got less interested in the scientific research. He wanted to be more of like a media mogul. He wanted to be more of like a celebrity. So he goes to buy like the biggest newspaper in circulation in Britain. Well, it says the company was relisted as Mirror Group in 1991. In 1991, the company was due to be investigated for alleged theft of software from companies including Adobe, Autodesk, and Microsoft. Those are 3 of the biggest software companies out there. The action was delayed as it coincided with Maxwell's death, but was recommenced in 1992. Subsequently, it was reported that at the Mirror Group, 700 out of the 800 software programs in use were found to be illegal, stolen. So out of the 800 software programs they were using, 700 of them had been stolen. And this was a company that was sold by Maxwell to let's see. No, I'm sorry. Purchased by Maxwell in 1984 from Reed International and relisted as the Mirror Group in 91. So they were under investigation. And yeah, they found out later after his death that, 90% of their software had actually been stolen. So that's a parallel story. Like the pattern recognition is a callback to the promise theft of 1983.
And that doesn't happen if Wall Street's doing its fiduciary duty, which of course they don't, because their fiduciary duties to themselves. Sadly, with all the great rules and regulations we have to protect investors' rights and to make sure underwriting is legitimate, and it is most of the 90% of the time, but the insiders have always, they got a way of making it appear to be legitimate business, and you don't find out till after the fact. It's one of the hardest parts about my former career is to keep investors out of the way of the scam artists, because they're everywhere. And they start at the top.
All right. Well, real quick, let's wrap up here. Let me do two quick ad reads, and then we're gonna hit the. I think we have a few rants, and then we'll get out of here. All right. So let's do My Pillow. Get ready to ignite a revolution with soft disclosure. Or I'm sorry, a large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving My Pillow with a ton of extra My Pillows. But you know what? That's their loss and your gain. My Pillow is offering the classic collection for wholesale prices, only $19.98 for a standard My Pillow. But it gets even better. For a limited time, they're going to offer their entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen size My Pillows for just $24.98. Upgrade to king size for only $29.98. Get the body pillows for $39.98 and multi-use My Pillows for only $12.98. So go to mypillow.com and use promo code Badlands or call 1-800-795-5154 to take advantage of wholesale pricing and receive $100 in free digital gifts when your order is $75 or more. That's right. Get the standard My Pillow for only $19.98. Go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-795-5154 and use promo code Badlands to get the standard My Pillow for only $19.98. All right, and then the other ad read we're going to do is a brand that we just launched here at Deadwood last week, and that is Soft Disclosure. Get ready to ignite a revolution with Soft Disclosure. This isn't just a product drop. It's a full-on movement that's about to shake things up. This is personal care that doesn't mess around. No compromises, just pure, unapologetic quality. First up, the lotion, supercharged with aloe, goat milk, and our exclusive Badlands oil blend. This isn't your average drugstore goop. It's a barrier-restoring powerhouse. Choose unscented when you want clean and simple, or vanilla citrus when you want to smell like you actually give a damn. Then the deodorant, natural, aluminum-free, and straight-up badass, built to last 2 months of daily use with scents like crisp mint or bold lemon grapefruit. No gimmicks, just protection that always delivers, or that actually delivers. And finally, the tallow bar. And no, it's not deodorant. It's a vanilla coffee tallow stick, primal fuel for skin that's been through hell. Rub it where you need it. Serious moisture, elbows, hands, knees, basically anywhere you're tired of feeling like sandpaper or just want baby soft skin. Every bottle, stick, and bar is handcrafted in Colorado by Badlanders who live and breathe truth. Partnering with Willow Wind Farm and Badlands Media, we're putting our money where our morals are. Soft Disclosure, make truth your routine. Head over to softdisclosure.com. Use promo code Badlands for $5 off and join the fight today. Yeah, so we are in the lotion business now.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
I'm working with a couple of startup companies that are actually looking to promote their products in the very near future using promo codes, and they're both very friendly to our audience. So we'll be talking to you guys about that sometime soon. Maybe, awesome. Just maybe, you'll be reading an ad from one of my companies.
There you go. I'd be honored to. All right, so G Fontes, $1.19, $1. Generoso, Pope Jr. owned National Enquirer from 1957 until his death in 1988, but the CEO, David J. Pecker, had close ties to the current president. Interesting. Okay. Generoso Pope Jr. he says owned National Enquirer from 1957 until his death, but the CEO is David J. Pecker. That must be the guy we were thinking of that we couldn't remember.
Pecker's exactly the guy. He was all over Spygate. A lot of that stuff. Pecker was showing up in the news quite a bit. I think there might even be a part of a chapter in Bongino's book, the first book about it, naming Pecker. It's an interesting story. I haven't. It's been too long, and I can't comment with any detail without looking at some very old notes. But yeah, that's the name. Thank you.
Sweet. Well, I don't think we have any boosts. There's like four pages of Codex 9/11 boost, which is awesome. I'm so happy for Brad. Have you seen Brad's documentary?
Have I?
Yeah. Last night we premiered Codex 9/11. Highly recommend. This is the documentary that Brad Zerba from Badlands has been working on for like 5 years.
We actually have it bookmarked, and I actually texted it to my wife, and we are planning to jump on that right here on my computer. Yeah, I'm planning on watching that. Brad does good work.
Oh yeah. Text me when you're done watching it, or even while you're watching it. I'd like to get your feedback. It is a narrative nuclear weapon. I think a narrative weapon of mass destruction is how I would describe it. Because it's very, very well done. So I highly encourage everyone who hasn't seen it yet, go to the Badlands Rumble page. It's pinned at the top, and spread it to everyone you know. I mean, it's very normie friendly. I've sent it to all my family members who think I'm crazy, who don't believe any of the stuff that I say. I think that, and I've already gotten some really positive feedback from some of them. So I think it's very, very friendly to people who don't think the way that we think. And I think it's going to be a game changer. So,
well, that really, what you just said ties into what I was going to say as my sign off is, Robert Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, people like that are very controversial. And there's a bunch of different stories out there. I don't think any of us knows 100% of the truth on everything, and people can have slightly different versions, and they're still very much worth listening to. So, I mean, I could watch Brad's video and say he's 98% of the time we disagree. We agree. And there'd be one or two things that I've drawn different conclusions on, something like that. And we see this happen quite a bit in our area of the internet, is sometimes people overreact to a disagreement. No, it's perfectly fine to draw a different conclusion, because we don't have 100% of the facts in front of us yet. And hopefully we do something. But, and that's why these conversations are so much fun, is because, I don't know, group knowledge, we kind of get closer to what we will eventually find out is the truth. And that's what matters.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the brilliance of the angle he took with the film is because it's not like a definitive whodunit. Like, he doesn't necessarily identify like the final perpetrator. He identifies perpetrators, and a lot of the people, the names that pop up are names that are going to be familiar because they're names that we learned during the first Trump administration and even since then. But what he really focuses on is, I think, just totally dismantling and destroying the official narrative. And it's like it's impossible to walk away from that and not understand that the government not only lied to us, but obviously conspired to kill Americans on that day. And
that's powerful. Yeah, and that's powerful, because once you start destroying the official narrative, you got to ask, what else are they lying about, and more importantly, why, and then we can start talking about who.
Yes,
I've got some great shows that are going to be diving into that exact same concept with the Colonel, Donna Watkins. Those are coming up soon, so keep an eye on her channel and mine for taking the thought you just expressed a little bit further. And awesome. I'll give you a little sneak preview. Can I give a little
sure, please,
shameless promo? Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, live on the Colonel's Corner, we are going to be looking at a recent Mike Benz video. Mike Benz does some tremendous work and research. I mean, he's very talented. I'm appreciative of his work. But the Colonel's been saying, he stops at 1947. He makes it seem like the CIA came about in 1947, and everything went downhill since then. And all of our work suggests that it goes back a lot further, and the CIA is actually a symptom and not the cause. And so we're going to go through a Mike Benz video tomorrow morning, and where he makes some great points, and then point out where he stopped short of who the true puppet masters are. And it should be really good. We'll do about 90 minutes to 2 hours tomorrow, but I hope you guys can check in. And, it's no disrespect to all the great work that Mike Benz has done, because he's really nailed the USAID as well as anybody, besides, I'd say, Data Republican, who is just, best data analyst I think I've ever seen in our movement. I think that woman is amazing. Anyway, that's my selfless plug. We'll be doing that tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, and you're going to want to check it out.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with just with scrutinizing like good work that people do. Like, there's nothing wrong.
Hey, you want to jump on with us tomorrow morning?
If I can, I will. 8 o'clock. I'll be taking my kids to school. But maybe when I get back, and then I got Badlands Daily at 10, I might be able to jump on for a few minutes at like 9 if y'all are still going.
Yeah, I'd love to. The only problem with that is you'll have missed so much. It's hard to jump in. It's hard to do.
I know. I'll text you tomorrow. Maybe I can listen while I'm getting my kids like rounded up, and I will.
Yeah, let me know. We'd love to have you. Colonel and I both love having you on.
Of course. Awesome. Give everyone your coordinates and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, best place to find me, go to Rumble. My main channel is War Space Hamster. And on X, you can find me at War_Hamster 1776.
Awesome. Well, Brady, Warhamster, thank you for being here. This has been Robert Maxwell Part 2. Robert Maxwell will continue to probably come up in other chapters that we're going to go over in this show, and it's all going to probably connect back to, I mean, we're talking about events that happened in the 80s, and these are names that are connecting to things that are happening right now. So it's pretty interesting time to be alive. This is the Book of Trump. We will see y'all next week.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.